Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Tim Smith here. Absolute pleasure to be on LinkedIn Live and have the chance to actually talk to all of us about digital transformation, effectively what it means to us on the back of a ton of research that we've done, and really just to have a conversation as to what it means to us and how to demystify it all. Before we jump in, though, maybe a little bit more on background as to the panelists that are here with us. So I mentioned that I'm with Deloitte Consulting. I've been with the firm for a fair amount of time, been servicing our clients across a host of sectors, you name it. Always a passionate technologist, always looking at the promise of what technology can do for the enterprise, whether it's growth, whether it's efficiency, you name it. And I still live that today. I also head up for the States what we call our tech strategy and business transformation practice, all part of our broader set of capabilities within strategy and analytics for Deloitte Consulting. So that's me. Let me go around the panel so you know who else will be speaking today. So Garima.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Garima Dhasmana. I'm a principal in our strategy and analytics practice, and I have the pleasure of working with our banking and capital market clients, helping them shape and execute their modernization and innovation agendas. Look forward to this discussion, and thank you for everyone who's joined us. Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Garima. I'm Greg Dost. I am a principal also in our strategy and analytics practice within Deloitte Consulting. And I work with technology leaders of global organizations across sectors on development of enterprise technology strategy, as well as the management and execution of the transformations of tech organizations and the tech estate that go along with that. Diana?
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. I am Diana Kearns-Monalatos. I am a research leader in Deloitte's Center for Integrated Research. And within our team, I lead our technology transformation research. Under that umbrella has been a 2-year research journey on the topic of technology value, and I'm really excited to be here today to discuss that.
Okay, so this is the panel. Happy to field questions as they come. Let's jump in and really kick this thing off. So as Diana mentioned, she used the phrase journey. For some of us, it's a quest. It's a quest to really understand what digital transformation means to you. Ultimately, how it expresses itself within the enterprise, and again, how to navigate it. Look, we all know digital transformation is here to stay. There really isn't any distance between enterprise transformation and digital transformation. We view it as one and the same, and we view it as a continuous effort. And I would assume most of us agree with that. Even in the face of economic headwinds, and we actually pulsed a host of CFOs not too long ago, a fourth quarter survey. We asked them, hey, even in the face of everything you're trying to decide, knowing the macroeconomic environment out there, what do you think about digital transformation and its role for you? And 75% or so said that it's going to play an even increasing role for them and spiking their corporate strategy and their ambitions therein. So we all have to tackle it. We all have to make it our own. We all have to contextualize it so we're making the right decisions. I'd love to promise on this panel today that we're going to tell you the answer for digital transformation for you. That we know this is what it should feel like. These are the tech bets you need to make. And if you just do these things correctly, throw a few dollars here and you'll see Y returns. Spoiler alert, we don't know that. No one knows that because it is so multivariate. Success or failure with digital transformation goes well beyond the technology you adopt. It has so much to do with how you mobilize the enterprise and all of these other factors. But, and we'll talk about this, the research that we've been tackling for some time charts a path forward effectively. Ways that you can eliminate some of the noise, ways that you can focus on truly that which you control. And what's coming in our research now is ultimately the value that comes and how to make it real for you, whether it's an industry or sector or regional bent. So without further ado, let's really jump in and get to the essence of it all. As we mentioned, this is a panel discussion along with Q&A that we can help work through. But before we get to everything regarding value and sizing and what that means for your balance sheet, again, it's worth demystifying or defining it. So Greg, starting with you on digital transformation, how do we define it?
Yeah, so there's a growing adage in the industry that if you ask 10 people the meaning of the term digital, you're going to get 20 different answers. And the same could arguably be said about the term transformation. So you put those two together, and what you get is a phrase that's used to mean many different things to many different people, to the point that the phrase can feel overused and meaningless. So rather than add to the confusion, add to the esoteric definitions, what we tried to do was to answer this in a very pragmatic way. So we asked CEOs of 24 different organizations, what does the phrase digital transformation mean to you? From that, a pattern emerged pretty quickly, which is that while digital transformations take many forms, our CEO respondents all describe digital transformation commonly as an ability to adopt and to apply technology with the dual aim of continuously evolving and reinventing their enterprises, ultimately with the end goal of growing and competing in the market. In our research, we heard not only this common definition for what digital transformation means, but also a common set of challenges that the CEO cohort was facing in running digital transformations. Among those, leaders across the enterprise often struggled to speak thematically about shared digital needs. This also meant that they had a misaligned view of the required investments and the risks that go along with digital transformation. Leaders would struggle to plan beyond a single technology versus looking holistically at the tech estate that was required to enable transformation. And also there was a tendency for digital and technology investments to not be integrated and to be amplified in a way that maximized value at the enterprise level. Now, in principle, it's helpful to uncover a common thought pattern around how CEOs view digital transformation, but really this pattern is more impactful when we look at the research that preceded the study that we're really going to focus on today. Very quickly, in that research, we look back at 10 years worth of 10K filings for just north of 4,500 different publicly traded companies. And we used NLP analysis within those 10Ks to identify patterns for how organizations talk about their strategic priorities, their digital ambitions, the specific technologies they're investing in, and their capacity for change. And what we found was that organizations that delivered a cohesive narrative to the market about their digital transformation ambitions and investments over time saw upwards of 15 percentage point differential in market cap relative to their peers who did not. And so that question of how do we define digital transformation is not an academic one, but rather it's a question that's of real consequence to organizations. I'll add very briefly to and a nod to the KPI framework that we're going to be discussing shortly. When we embarked on our last round of research, the impact of digital ambitions on market cap was not a common KPI that many organizations were using. And so you'll hear that a big part of the focus in our research here is to think about new types of metrics organizations can be using to tell a more holistic and a more compelling story around the bold bets that their companies are making in the digital transformation space.
Okay, well, you know what the next question is going to be because we always hit this right after the definition, but I think it's important for all, Greg, and you've mentioned it, saying it takes many forms. So what are the forms? What is a spectrum? How do you point which to take on?
Yeah, so what we saw in our research is that, like you mentioned, there's a spectrum and it breaks into 5 different groups. I'll refer to these as level 0 to level 4, digital transformation. So let me start with level 0 and level 1. 0 and 1 we refer to in our research as digitization. Level 0, I'd call incremental digitization. Simply put, a company is maintaining the same business model they have today. They're delivering on the same capabilities. They're operating in the same markets as before. And what they're doing is they're deploying new technologies to drive incremental operational improvements, perhaps with incremental cost improvements. So think of a customer service organization that's deploying a new case management system to serve customers better. Level 1, we would call advanced digitization. Once again, companies operating with the same business model, delivering the same capabilities, operating in the same market as before. However, the digitization in this case is less incremental and more radical. So think that case management system from my previous example. now includes automation of customer service activities, perhaps integration with supply chain distribution systems to automate orders and product delivery, so you're going across a full value stream. So both of these types of digitization deliver meaningful value to the company and to its customers. But we're still within the same space in terms of business model, capabilities, market, and the sponsorship for these types of efforts likely sits within one or a few business units, likely not spanning the entirety of the enterprise. That's 0 and 1. If I move to levels 2, 3, and 4, those are the ones that we're going to refer to as digitally enabled business transformation. I could go on for a while, so I'll be very succinct in this. In level 2, you're using digital to enter new markets. So think of how, let's think of things like how digital banking and fintech have removed traditional barriers for financial services firms to enter new markets. In level 3, you're using digital to create new products. Think of how IoT and edge computing have unlocked fundamentally new ways for technology companies and for industrial product firms to engage with their customers who buy their products and services. And then in level 4, you're using digital to radically transform your business. This is a new business model, capabilities, products disrupting the industry. It's a new ecosystem, and it's a radical shift, and one that typically a CEO may be staking their legacy on. So as a disclaimer, this model isn't meant to put any one organization in a box. So it's not that you're at level 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. In fact, organizations can be showing up at multiple points on the spectrum at the same time. I'll use AI investments as an example, right? One of our colleagues offers a construct that I love, which is AI in process and AI in product that helps illuminate this. AI in process, a company may be making artificial intelligence investments that drive level 0 incremental digitization by removing administrative tasks like note-taking from customer service interactions. The company may also be making AI investments for level 1 advanced digitization by employing generative AI to increase self-service adoption for more straightforward customer service needs. Both of these are examples of digitization, both examples of AI embedded in the process. At the same time, the organization may be embedding AI in what it sells to customers. Suppose that a company historically has sold products that consumers use in their day-to-day lives, and suppose those products can be connected to the internet, gather data on how consumers use products, and then offer AI-enabled recommendation. Same area of investment fundamentally, but very different outcomes that are tied to very different levels of ambition.
And so for all of us here, big piece of the research that just came out was, to use a phrase, contextualization, right? Really understanding how you slice and dice digital transformation based off who you are, vis-a-vis region, vis-a-vis sector, you name it. So Greg, piling on to that, there's nuances that we've seen in terms of where I guess various slices fall on the spectrum, like the types. What do you think about whether they dominate in certain sectors or regions versus others? Are we seeing differences in bets?
Yeah, and there's so much to be said on this topic. I'll touch on this briefly, and I think Garima and Diana, you have great examples that go deeper on some of this. But where this gets really interesting is when we use this construct of level 0 to level 4 transformation. We went out and surveyed 1,600 leaders across different industries, and it was pretty balanced, right? So we included about 300 organizations, each from companies in our 5 main private sector industry groups, as well as 150 government and public services organizations. And we asked them, how do you define digital transformation for your organization? What is your level of ambition along that spectrum? And across the board, the ambitions were pretty bold. So for each industry group, between 69 and 77% of respondents indicated that they used the level 4 definition. So that is an overwhelming majority say that digital transformation is about radically transforming their enterprises. And there was a little bit of spread there from the 69 to 77%, but vast majority for each of them. The remainder of the respondents, interestingly, they were split evenly, more or less, between level 0, level 1, level 3. Not a lot of love in terms of companies indexing on level 2, digital to enter new markets. But what was perhaps even more eye-opening than the boldness of their ambitions is how their spend reflects their priorities. So we asked the same 1,600 respondents, and we looked at the industry groups for us. Where is your annual spend going across the different levels of digital transformation ambition? And we found quickly that the budgets don't match the ambitions across sectors. So remember, 69 to 77% said we are using the level 4 definition. Across the board, about half of those organizations, across the board, all of those industry groups were on average putting about half of their spend toward level 4 transformation. Now, interestingly, government and public services came in higher in terms of percentage of spend going to level 4. That was at 57%. Life sciences and healthcare was right behind that, about 55% of their spend going to those ambitions. And the lowest, fascinatingly enough, was in technology, media, and telecom at 44%. You asked about industry. You also asked about the geographic view. And so if we pivot to that for a second, we looked at cuts of data across countries, US, Canada, Germany, France, and Australia. And we saw, again, same average dynamic at 52%, but intriguingly, US and UK respondents were putting lower amounts. They're putting about 44% of their digital transformation spend into level 4. I'll add quickly too that the industry groups all showed some level of meaningful digital transformation spend across all levels 0 through 4. So that aligns with that notion that many companies can and do find themselves at multiple points on the digital transformation spectrum.
So, I've never heard it at that depth, to be frank. So what still strikes me, and just to play it back, vast majority of folks were saying, hey, when we take on digital transformation, it's radical. It's almost like we're greenfielding out a new business because it's so different than what we're doing today, right? New offerings, new operating model, you name it, right? So our respondents were saying that's what they're doing, yet the spend doesn't match it. What's the theory of the case as to why? Still a semantics issue, a definition issue, or we have a lot of companies out there that can radically transform with not much investment?
So there's a bit of supposition in this, and I'll defer on this question a bit to Diane, and to Diane, who's our data scientist behind a lot of the the detailed research here. I think it's for a lot of organizations, this is it's a journey that they're on. It's a transformational story, and ambitions that are evolving from one year to the next. And so I think what we've got right now is let's call it a point in time view. Where a lot of organizations have learned to be very bold in what their ambitions are. And the spend behavior, perhaps is evolving at a different pace than that. I think there's also a question of across the board and then at an industry level, where that spend goes and what the cost structures are to enter into some of those more transformative spaces. And I think Garima, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're going to get a little bit into where we saw some of those spend patterns within industries by different technology groups and so on.
Yep, that's accurate. And I think, Tim, one other point to add to that is really just what we hit upon earlier, which is around the definition of digital, and then you bring in digital transformation and what that means to business leaders, organizations, right? A lot of different thoughts you and I have heard across the various different conferences that we've presented this topic at. So I think it's a combination of all those factors in terms of the mismatch we see on what is perceived as an investment in digital transformation and what value people are seeing out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to layer in on that of, why the money is not going there, I think that also gets us to our issue of value that we're here to discuss. There are very high ambitions, high expectations, but what we found from our study is 3 out of 4 leaders don't know how to measure the value. And so there are real consequences to the investments because of that. You end up either underinvesting or not moving forward with the bold investments you need to back up those ambitions. So I think that will get us into this topic of discussion about why measurement is so important, to make sure that you're making those connections to the ambitions, the enterprise value and expectations, and that you have a common and consistent way to frame and measure that topic of value so that you can right-size your investments.
Fascinating. Okay, before I take us down a rabbit hole and everything value and metrics, I do want to make sure we round out sort of the so what as it pertains to digital transformations. And Greg, you alluded to it. Garima, I know you spent a long time on this, which is the tech aspect of this. Now, again, just to get on my soapbox, when we look at digital transformation and the technology you select has to ladder back to your ambitions and ultimately what the enterprise can take on from a change perspective. But we did think it was important when we did this research to really shine a light as to what types of technologies are receiving the most amount of investments, and how that might differ across the various sort of segments. So Garima, can you shine a light on everything tech?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've seen for the past couple of decades with the work that a lot of us have driven across various industries is really the momentum around big data increasingly grow and then evolve to other data related tech capabilities. And this is evident through our research as well, where we found data and analytics really dominating the tech investments across the 21 tech capabilities we analyzed, very closely followed by investments in, no points for guessing, artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as cloud platforms and just cloud native development, given the adoption we've seen around cloud in the last decade. Now, as we look closely at the industries specifically, there are very few very logical trends that have emerged. Given the focus on research and development and data being at such a core essence of it, life sciences and healthcare is really leading the way with investments in data and analytics. That is what they invest in from their technology dollar spend perspective. Consumer sector, on the other hand, is a very interesting case because they focus, based on the research we've done, on really investing in APIs and middleware, which is emphasizing the importance of seamless, efficient integrations that is so integral to their technology ecosystem, given the number of partners they have to coordinate across with suppliers, distributors, customers, etc. And then when you look at financial services, really going all in, outpacing technology investments in several of our 21 tech capabilities we analyzed, including mobile, cloud, broadband, wireless. What is interesting in looking at industries holistically is, as compared to other industries, telecom, media, and technology lags behind in their technology investments in data, AI, ML, mobile, 5G, IoT. And we believe that is because generally they're early adopters of technology, and they're right now in a phase where they're sustaining those technology investments rather than really amplifying or ramping up on it.
Okay, thank you. And let's flip it on its head. So if we've talked about the types, if we've talked about some of the nuances we see for tech, and whether our data is backing up a lot of the trends we see, and maybe at the end of this, we should talk about Gen AI and other things we're figuring out. The other thing to acknowledge is that digital transformation is no mean feat. It's quite difficult to actually navigate in the enterprise, and we could spend all day talking about some of the tips and tricks. But we did, as part of the survey, right, Garima, actually ask about a lot of the barriers folks faced in getting it done, and what rose to the surface when we looked at it from that angle.
Yeah, both from our research study as well as something that we've seen increasingly, with our clients, thinking extensively about just their reliance on legacy platforms and or ways to modernize those legacy platforms. You'll see from our research, our consumer leaders are way more concerned about this particular aspect, almost 10 percentage points above the overall industry average. a very close kind of second challenge to embarking on any digital transformation journey is really around security and trust in your technology ecosystem, and the level of confidence you have in it as you think about a multi-year digital transformation journey. And this is of significance to our financial services leaders, given the highly regulated nature of the business model that the banks need to comply with. We've also seen with our government and public sector leaders, they've discussed extensively in our research the lack of transformation strategy and executive buy-in, which is very likely driven by the scale and scope of what they need to get their hands around and just kind of the nature of operations in this sector. We've also covered several other barriers, a lot of which we see, at organizations we support, including things like funding prioritization. There's workforce-related challenges. There's also challenges with insufficient data, really informing your holistic, comprehensive digital strategy. But what is interesting in all of this is that as compared to other industries, life sciences and healthcare, in comparison, is the least impacted by these challenges, given their focus on longer-term strategy and continued planning for shifts in evolution in their business model, in their products and services, which really is, if you think about it, one of the bigger learnings coming out of the last 4 or 5 years, COVID being one of those external triggers that very materially change their business model, products, services, etc.
Perfect. And we're following along too. So we have an audience question about GPS and nonprofits and how much in their survey. So about 80 GPS nonprofits were surveyed as part of that. So they do show up. We were intentional on that as well because we know the nature of the digital transformations for them is quite distinct. So that does show up in the research. Garima, just to pull one more thread, because you mentioned about challenges with the data. And I know Diana's probably going to walk us through more from the value lens, but the metrics themselves and the KPIs, I know that's going to be top of mind for a lot of us as we tackle this. Any special barriers to those KPIs that came out?
Yeah. Yep. And Diana's going to get into a whole lot of details here, but you're right. I think there's kind of another lens to this whole barrier and challenge conversation, which is why are companies failing to uncover the value from digital transformation when it actually exists, right? So that's kind of what the focus of our next evolution of research, where we surveyed the 1,600 business leaders globally across various industries that Greg also alluded to, that was the focus of that research. Interestingly enough, in our research, a vast majority of the respondents, almost 73%, believe that it is the inability to define exact impacts or exact metrics that is the biggest barrier to uncovering digital value. And then when you think about this getting amplified by inability to be able to collect data, as well as organizational silos that may exist, that very often exist, that kind of just exacerbates the whole problem here. None of this is surprising for us, given that we work with organizations who struggle with quantifying value, creating the value narratives, being able to tie it up to the enterprise value levers like revenue growth, reduced risk, etc. So all this made sense from what we found in our research. What is interesting, and what we also found being discussed extensively in our research with almost 80% of the respondents, was the fear of double counting, and more prevalently for popular KPIs like customer engagement, impact on revenue, that get very high visibility from senior C-level execs. So here is the bottom line, and kind of my last thoughts on the topic around barriers and challenges. Despite all these barriers, which we understand in some way or form exist in most organizations, what we have found as separating our value leaders from others is really their ability to push past these challenges and treat them as solvable.
Okay. So I'd like to pivot now and really do we only have so much time, a deeper cut as to what we started to find in terms of prescribing and ascribing value to everything. But let's just recap as to the conversation so far. So we feel comfortable that there's a definition out there for you that can make sense as to exactly what digital transformation is. We feel comfortable that there's a spectrum that you could look at and understand, well, this is what I am doing. This is what I'm communicating I'm doing. Does that really align with the reality of everything that's in play? Am I really changing products? Am I really entering new markets? Or am I just doing radical productivity enhancements? And that matters because, again, you're going to mobilize differently. You're going to invest differently. And we've talked about, some of the nuances that are there. Now, I know we have a broad audience today. So rest assured, the material that's out there allows you to pick and choose based off sector and region. But knowing all of that, and then some other tips and tricks are along the way, it is important to now play back and say, look, this is how other folks are thinking about the value that comes. And who better but you, Diana, to kick that off for us based off how much of the number crunching you've done. So maybe stepping back, you want to tell us how value is sort of formed here?
Absolutely. So from our research on mapping digital transformation value, we know that 70% of organizations, to a large or a very large extent, agree that digital transformation is the single most important thing that they can be doing to drive enterprise value. So those are some pretty high expectations. But at the same time, our data shows that while it's important to them, as we were discussing before, many of organizations just aren't really investing to the levels that they should be. They're struggling to define their value measures, as Garima mentioned, and they really aren't able to make those connections to how those investments specifically are driving that enterprise value that they think it should be. And to just give you a number that I think really brings that point home, on average, from our survey, we saw that global organizations expect that their digital investments are driving 29% of their enterprise value. For the largest organizations out there, those that are over 100 billion in revenue, almost half of their enterprise value they expect to be coming from their has been coming from their digital investments. There was a question in the chat earlier about nonprofits, which, as Tim mentioned, is about 5% or 80 firms in our sample. So with respect to nonprofits as well as privately held companies, which are going to be different, we actually saw that those expectations as well as the enthusiasm for digital transformation is even higher. More than 20% agreed to a very large extent that digital transformation is the single most important thing that they could be doing. So that even higher 20% percentage points of organizations are expecting it to be a tremendous driver of their enterprise value. And digital value expectations are relatively consistent no matter what industry you're in. Life sciences and healthcare, consumer, GPS industries, they tended to fall in that range of expecting 21 to 30% of their enterprise value to be coming from their investments. So there's a big disconnect there when we say, on the one hand, that 70% of organizations think that it's the single most important thing they can be doing to drive enterprise value. But then on average, they're only able to measure about 30% of their enterprise value coming from that. So whereas that can be a large percentage, it's also not in line with those expectations. And so those investment levels are one important driver to be looking at. The other, of course, is what industry you're in. So we do see some differences for TMT respondents. TMT respondents are technology, media, and telecommunications companies are able to do a better job of tracking the value. And they say that almost half, 52%, a little more than half of their value is coming from their investments in digital transformations. Financial services respondents as well are considering a larger share of their enterprise value coming from digital investments. And so that's the good news. We do see other industries like energy, resources, industrials respondents that generally are attributing a lower percent of their enterprise value than average to their digital investments. So for the industry and sector perspectives, we see that they're not necessarily keeping pace in certain industries with the value that they could be getting there. And what does it come down to? We spoke about it earlier, is thinking more holistically about the value you could be getting. So when designing the study on mapping digital transformation value, our goal was to really understand how organizations are measuring digital value today. And so in the survey, we identified a really diverse set of KPIs representative of all different types of value categories, where organizations might be looking to optimize value having to do with productivity or workforce measures, where they might be looking to preserve and protect value having to do with their cyber investments that they might be making to manage risk, and also where they might be looking to create new value in that level 2, 3, or 4 transformation, which Greg spoke about. And so the goal here of the study was really to give us a holistic view of how global organizations are benchmarking that digital value today, given many are struggling to figure out what the right measures are. And so I think what's really exciting about this study is, based on the data from the 1,600 global business and technology leaders, we really do have a view of what the KPIs are that they're using to understand digital value, where there might be gaps and where there might be opportunities to make a better connection to their enterprise ambitions. And one of the things that I'll highlight from the study is that really a striking vast majority, 81% of respondents, regardless of industry, said that productivity was the top measure that they're using. And so when on the one hand, your ambition is dramatic transformation to enter new markets and radicalize your business operating model, and your primary value measure is productivity of, optimizing your existing way of doing things, there's a major disconnect there. And so that's one area that we looked at. And we saw that in particular for large organizations, that was really the only place where productivity wasn't their number one focus, and where there were other indicators that had a high focus for firms of 100 billion plus. But other than that, industry region productivity was the number one. We did see in our industry analysis some differences. So for example, financial services organization had a very high focus on budget versus actual cost and ROI and operating margin. Consumer organizations were much more focused on customer engagement. And in terms of some of the top workforce metrics, we saw things like employee productivity also very high. Some of the low measures, just to call out, were things like number of agile or pod teams. So, given how central and important agile operating models are, only a very few, 31% of organizations were actually looking at agile, pod, and engineering culture as an important driver of change. So of the 46 possible KPIs that we asked about, surprisingly, only about half of them are being utilized by organizations today. And so there are a lot of gaps, a lot of levers to be pulling and thinking about to move toward that more holistic value mindset.
Look, I think it's important to underscore too that the most striking thing that we had in aggregate, agnostic to an industry or sector, was the fact that if everybody was believing that these digital transformations are super bold, then there's no way that the top KPI should still be return on invested capital and productivity enhancements, right? For sure, those are important measures, but the fact that it didn't permeate to the talent experience, the developer experience, you're going to be all digital all the time. Enterprise agility, I mean, the list goes on and on. Purpose was quite surprising for us. I think it's a hypothesis. I'm speculating from it, but I think it's back to what I believe was Garima talking about it earlier, which is the reality has not yet caught up with the ambition, right? And so why do we continue to index on this for this call is more of there's competitive advantage here. There's space for you to play, to think thoughtfully about ultimately what these digital transformations can do for you, because you can actually hone your investments in a different perspective. Meaning if all of your competitors in a sector or a region are going in one direction, assuming that it's going to be, legacy type metrics, and you're using it to turn on other aspects, you're going to get a lot more leverage for your dollars. There's a few questions that are being queued up, and we'll get through all of them. I want to make sure we stay a bit thematic on it. There was a question regarding, and Diana, you can hit it, was auto as part of their survey? The answer is yes, that laddered up into broader sector findings. Separate from this call, you can look at the research that we do talk about each given sector and the metrics and the KPIs and where they're investing. But Diana, any reflections from what we've seen regarding manufacturing organizations and how they incorporate digital transformation?
Yeah, so on that in particular, I would point out two things. Some of the metrics that we have in the KPI framework from a process and financial standpoint, supply chain optimization is a big one for manufacturing as well as auto. And then ROI, that was also a big one for consumer respondents, which would include auto and manufacturing.
Okay, so I think it's also important to say, Greg talked about it earlier, so it's not like we're going to slide up or anything, though. It's always hard for me to talk without slides, but we mentioned the spectrum of digital transformation, in which we have more of these foundational, what we call digitization type moves. And then you cross a chasm and then you're into, new products, new markets, radical reinvention, digital transformation. Semantics, to be frank, at the end of the day, but different motions. And again, one isn't better than the other, et cetera. And a lot of times, to be bold in your digital transformation, you're going to have to get the foundation right. A great example is, Gen AI and the promise and potential as to what that can do. You could argue everything with Gen AI is a, level X to the right type of digital transformation as to what can happen. But on the flip side, I could look at it and say, you know what? Most of the use cases for Gen AI that are ready right now, that you can do right now because the data is clean, are things like productivity, developer efficiency, you name it, right? So Gen AI goes against different buckets for it. But Diana, when you reflect on sort of the metrics and the KPIs that we have out there, you seen anything different for those who are tackling sort of meat and potatoes digitization versus a more radical transformation?
Yeah, great question. And I think that also gets to one of the questions in the chat about, what are the different levers? And so I think what we're seeing from the data is that at those early stages, the level 0-1 digitization, that the KPIs that, those organizations that said they're investing in digitization tend to be using at greater numbers are those productivity measures. So they're focused on, we have 5 categories of value that we talk about in this framework: financial value, customer value, process-related value, KPIs, workforce, and purpose. And these early stage digitization folks tend to focus more on process KPIs like productivity, as well as workforce KPIs like workforce engagement. So their focus is inward, and some other important KPIs for them are things like system integration and user adoption rates as measures that they're looking at to think about how their infrastructure can be optimized and how they can really digitize their processes. What we see from the advanced digital transformation group is that their KPIs tend to also be more mature. They're more externally focused in their KPIs, looking at things like the ROI of their digital initiatives, digital revenue growth, customer digital engagement, and digital process efficiency. So they're looking at more financial focused measures, the external market, their customers, and how they're reducing friction in the processes for their customers. So 2 really completely different value mindsets. as they shift from those, basic ambitions, they tend to align more with basic measures. And as they move to those advanced ambitions, they tend to be using more externally facing and advanced types of measures.
Got it. And to go to leverage, phrases such as advanced and legacy and traditional versus edge, all that good stuff. There was a question that came up specifically about the value narrative itself, like how you tell that story and how that story might change based off whether you're more traditional, which I assume is like brick and mortar, versus, I guess, alternative organizations, but assembling the value narrative for a more traditional organization. And Greg, I know you've done a lot of thinking about this. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, maybe quickly. I think of a really good value story is sometimes best done when it's a partnership within the business and when you're transcending organizational lines. So as an example, we're seeing a lot of increased interest in the market around AI ops, so AI for IT operations. And that you go back 3-4 years ago, a lot of organizations were thinking of that as an efficiency play within the IT shop. There's another way to frame that when you engage with folks throughout the business, which is AI and IT operations as a revenue enabler. So if I'm deploying automation and AI within my core applications, my infrastructure network, so on and so forth, the ability to keep the performance and the availability of my systems really high, yes, that does drive some operational efficiency. But in an organization, let's say that's $10 billion of revenue or greater, per year, if I'm adding one more 9 in a core availability of a core application that's revenue generating, that's worth millions and millions of dollars in revenue to my organization. What I need to do is I need to collaborate with the product owners for those applications. I need to collaborate with infrastructure. I need to collaborate with my customers to understand what the customer experience is like for them and where they're having challenges in engaging technologically with my company. But having that partnership and taking that value stream lens is a great way to pivot how an organization that may be thinking efficiency and lower cost structure can pivot to more of a like revenue and a customer orientation in some of their KPIs.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So I want to bring it back home. It is difficult these days to talk digital transformation without trying to shine a bit more light on some of the dominant tech that's out there. So Garima talked a fair amount about this, and you can see it in the research as to where the investments are going. But we were survey based, so that is a lagging indicator as to where things are at right now. We know Gen AI is top of mind. I also talked about how Gen AI shows up in digital transformations across the spectrum. But Deloitte's also spent a lot of time really trying to talk about what Gen AI means in terms of the state of the art and all those good aspects. But Diana, based off the research we've done and what we've seen in terms of value associated with Gen AI, what are some of the green shoots that are coming up, knowing again, it's relatively new in the data space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are 3 important points here. So first off, Deloitte, we just published our generative AI, our State of Generative AI 2024. And in that study, we found that there are very high expectations for generative AI and the value it's going to drive. 79% of the respondents in that survey of almost 3,000 global leaders said that they expect Gen AI to transform their organization in the next 3 years. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how are they looking at what that transformation means? In practice, they're mostly focused on practical benefits, things like improving efficiency and productivity, reducing costs, and improving existing products and services. So that's the first thing about where we are today. The third point is that thinking more broadly about innovation. So it's not just Gen AI, there's a lot of innovation to track over the next couple of years. And so how do you keep pace with that technology on this, change on this topic of value? And from our survey, I think we can really see that the answer to that is thinking about your timeline. So we see in our data that organizations predominantly are measuring value on a quarterly or an annual cycle. Very few are looking at 3 to 5 year value horizons. But for some of these new technologies, whether it's generative AI or quantum or others that are coming in, those that are getting the most value in terms of enterprise value from the study, we see that they have that longer time horizon mindset of 3 years plus. So that's a lever to be pulling today, is having a consistent short-term and medium to long-term view of how investments are meant to be driving value.
Okay. So let's try to put a feather on this and bring it home. So we've talked to everyone as to really what is a deep cut of the research that's out there. Why? Because to be frank, there is no one answer as to what digital transformation means to you or how to get it right. And so we hope we've left behind all but a start of where you got to investigate and shore up your digital transformation ambitions. But around the panel, I'd be curious to hear any parting shots from you as to what to get right for digital transformation and reflection on everything you've absorbed, all the numbers you've looked at, and just what you've learned in the field. So I'll go around the Brady Bunch window. So maybe Greg, start with you.
I always say step one is reflection. So I'd say, invest the time to kind of step back and think about what that holistic framework could look like. Who are your partners that you need to work with in order to be able to build that narrative, and take the time to evolve and to grow out that narrative. It's not going to be easy, but it's certainly worth it.
Okay, Garima, what's your take?
Yeah, I think three main things. One, really recognizing the importance of being able to uncover the hidden value and then, report on it. We all understand the amount of time, effort it takes to go through these multi-year journeys on, digital transformations for any organization. And I think we owe it to ourselves as digital transformation leaders and to our organizations to be able to position us in a way where we can discuss tangible values for these efforts coming out of such significant investments. Secondly, any transformation holistically impacts the entire organization. So it's not just about technology, it's about a lot of other aspects of your entire business and operation. So then why not lead with a value framework that is also comprehensive? And you have a starting point with a whole lot of research that we've put out there. And then lastly, I would say act now. It can start with something reasonable. Doesn't need to be holistic and comprehensive at the very start, but then something that's reasonable, small, gets you to the next step and eventually drives towards that longer term vision. So that would be my parting shots.
Okay, and last but not least, Diana.
I would say differentiate from peers by identifying competitive value streams. And I think that's the beauty of having a consistent framework for thinking about value. It allows you to benchmark every investment in every technology in a consistent way, and to look at what your competitors are doing to see with intentionality where you maybe need to refocus and recalibrate your investments based on what your competitive strategy is.
If I take the time and reflect on all of it, the research is ongoing. It will be for some time. But if we look back as to how it started, it was defining it all. It was figuring out the types you could take on. It was asking CEOs as to exactly where they lean in to make it at least get across the finish line. And then really looking at scale analyses to understand what that does to market cap, and then scale surveys to understand exactly how people are doing it in the field. So the biggest reflection I have, and it actually ties to a question that we saw a bit earlier in the exchange here, was if you think about what has to happen to get it done correctly, first and foremost, it is strategy 101. It's ultimately about what are your ambitions? Why is the promise of technology something you need to outpace competition, to be that much more adaptable, that much more flexible, right? So how does it ultimately ladder to your corporate strategy, your enterprise ambitions? Then the next question is, where is the value to come, right? If I pull these levers, if I actually impact these capabilities in this certain dimension, what is the upside, what are the cost takeouts, et cetera? Then it's the technology. ultimately tell me the technology that's best suited to do it. And then underscoring all of it, done in parallel with it, is your organization's capacity to actually take it on. Someone had a question about horizon and timeline and things like that. It is, sure, you can do some digitizations that might happen in a couple of years or things like that. It probably doesn't rise to the surface of what we're talking about here, because you're really not impacting the enterprise beyond a given, say, business unit, et cetera, maybe. But what's more important is that not factoring in ultimately whether your organization will stick with you on this for the long haul. Super important. If you can use this research, the value drivers, the way to make sense out of it, the way to convince folks that, you know, there's real upside here, the way to convince folks that I'm doing it in such a way that is distinct from my competition, and the way to convince folks, whether you're CFO, the board, whoever, that the way I'm orienting this digital transformation increases the odds of success. That is our hope for using this research, right? Because again, there is no one size fits all for it. And if you get any takeaway besides understanding where to look and how to make this happen, just understand you're not alone in trying to tackle something this gnarly. But getting all three right and getting the lineage between your corporate strategy, your technology bets, and whether the organization will stick with it, that's the keys to success. And so from, you know, Deloitte Consulting, from the Center for Integrated Research, from all of us, we thank everybody for participation here in this LinkedIn Live. We'll certainly send out, and you probably can see all of the links that are available for the research. We are just a ping away for it. And just as a shout out for the series, also, we do hope you can attend one that's going to be happening on February 15th. As I mentioned, we're part of our strategy and analytics practice, and we're quite excited about a new capability we're adding to strategy and analytics that are going to take thinking as it pertains to scale analytics to a transcendent level. All of that will happen on 2/15, and we hope you can attend. Thank you, everybody, for your time.